Hi there. So the last thing we're going to take a look at in terms of repetition are Sentinel controlled loops. Up to this point we've been looking at counter controlled loops where we're literally counting the number of times that a loop runs. A Sentinel controlled loop gives us a little more freedom and allows the user to interact with the repetition a little bit more. What it will do is allow the user to end the loop. The loop terminates dependent on a condition, but the condition doesn't have to be a counter. And there's no predetermined number of times that the loop will repeat. So we don't always know when we start out the code how many times the loop is going to repeat or that piece of code is going to run. Again, I think we'll jump straight into an example. So an example that would require a Sentinel controlled loop is this one, repetition3.java. Develop an application that accepts a series of numbers from the user until the user enters 0. So we don't know how many times this piece of code is going to run. It's just going to continue asking the user for a number until they enter 0. When 0 is entered, the application should then output the sum of all the numbers that they entered. So what we want to do is we want to have a running total of the numbers that the user enters, and then when the user enters 0, we exit the loop and we print out the sum. So let's take a look at this in TextPad. Okay, here I have TextPad open. Again, repetition3.java is the name of my file, and I've saved it already and I've added in my comment. I have my class header, public class repetition3. Then my main method header, public static void main string args. Close my curly brackets. Okay, and we were asked to ask the user for a number. Okay, and we're going to total those numbers. So let's just deal with integers for now, and we're going to have an integer for number, but we're also going to need an integer for sum. Okay, to count or to add up the sum of all the numbers that the user enters. Okay, the first thing we want to do is we want to ask the user to enter in a number. Okay, so number equals J option pane dot show message dialog null. Please enter a number, and we'll put a little note or 0 to exit. Okay, now again J option pane reads strings only, so we're going to have to parse this in order to turn it into an integer. So integer dot parse int, open our round bracket, and then go to the end of our line of code and close that round bracket. I'll just minimize this so that we can see it all on screen. Okay, so we read in the value from the user and we store it in number. Then we want to add that to what's in sum. So actually I'm going to initialize my sum here to have a value of 0, and then when the number is entered I'm going to say sum is now equal to whatever's in sum plus whatever the user entered as a number. So we're adding on the number to what's in sum, which at the moment is 0, and then that new value gets stored in sum. And this is going to allow us to keep a running total of everything that the user enters. Okay? Now obviously we want to repeat this process. We want to do it over and over and over again until the user enters 0. Okay? For loop is probably not the best loop to use here, so we're going to use a while loop instead. And we're going to say while sum is not equal to 0. So as often as the sum is not equal to 0, we're going to accept a number from the user. We're going to add it to number. While number is not equal to 0, we're going to accept a number from the user and we're going to add it to the sum, and then we're going to close our curly bracket. So I'll just indent these so that everything's aligned properly. So our control here is that the loop will run so long as number is not equal to 0. Okay? Now, if I compile this, I expect, yes, we do have a couple of issues. Okay? The first issue that I have is that I've spelled string wrong here, so I'll fix that. Alright. And then the next issue we have is cannot find symbol J option pane. So we're going to need to import J option pane. Okay, import javax.swing.j option pane. Let's compile that again. Okay, so now I have another error. My goodness, this program's full of typos. So I have another one here. Show message dialog is where the issue is coming from, and that's because I've used show message dialog, and what I intended to use, apologies for that, is show input dialog. So anyway, now we'll compile it and we'll get the error I expected to get, which is variable number might not have been initialized. So I cannot test whether number is equal to 0 or not if I haven't given number a value to start with. So similarly to how we initialized sum to 0, we need to initialize number to something. We don't want to initialize number to 0 because then our loop will never run, because it only runs when number is not equal to 0. So let's just give it a value of 1 instead. When we compile it, it finally compiles successfully. And then we run it, and it says please enter a number or 0 to exit. So 5, and we get asked again, 6, 2, 8, 9, and now I'll enter 0 and it should exit the loop. Okay, now what we haven't done yet is what we want to do after the loop runs, which is print the sum to the user. So J option pane, and now we use message dialog, null, the sum of those numbers is plus sum. We'll compile this and we'll run it. 2, 5, 7, 9, 10, and if I press 0, it exits and it tells me the sum of those numbers is 33. Okay, so just to recap, we have two variables, number and sum. Number is to hold the value that the user enters, and sum is to hold the running total of all the different numbers. We have a while loop, where the condition is that the loop runs when number is not equal to 0. So we've initialized number to 1 to start with. Then we ask the user to enter in a number using our integer.parseInt and our joptionPane.show input dialog. We add that number to the sum and store the answer in sum. And then when the loop exits, when it's finished, we print the sum of all of those numbers. And that will give the total of all the numbers the user entered to the user, but only after they've entered 0. So that's a Sentinel controlled loop, where the user determines how often the loop is going to run and when they would like it to stop. And again, this can be a very useful feature in some of your programs going forward, so it's important that you are familiar with it. That's all for repetition for now. Just to recap, we looked at the 3 different structures of the different loops available to us in Java. Well, 3 of them. We looked at the for, the while and the do while loop, and the way that the data flowed through those counter-controlled loops. We looked at how we can nest one loop inside of another, and we've taken a look at how we can control loops not with counters but with Sentinel conditions. So here, if a condition is true, the loop will run again. If it's not, the loop will exit. That's all for repetition, but you will continue to use these in lots of ways in later examples, and we'll come back to loops then where we need them later on in other topics. Thanks.